The water coming out of my tap had the same lead levels as toxic waste. Not similar, not close. The exact same classification as hazardous waste that requires special disposal. And I was brushing my teeth with it. I was 12 years old when my government started poisoning me. Not by accident. Not through negligence. They made a choice. They knew the water was dangerous. They knew children's brains were being damaged. They knew people were dying. And they looked directly at us, at 100,000 people begging for help, and told us we were making it up. For 18 months, my 7-year-old sister bathed in poison. For 18 months, my neighbors cooked their children's meals with neurotoxins. For 18 months, an entire American city was slowly destroyed from the inside out while government officials wrote emails joking about our complaints. This isn't a story about a water crisis. This is a story about what happens when the people in power decide your life isn't worth $100 a day. Because that's what it would have cost to prevent this. $100 per day to save a city. They chose not to spend it. My name doesn't matter to this story. But what happened to me, to my family, to my community, that matters more than you can imagine. Because if it happened to us, it can happen to you. Let me take you back to before April 2014. Before everything changed, my family lived in a small house on the north side of Flint. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a backyard where my sister and I would run through the sprinkler on summer days. My mom worked at the hospital. My dad worked maintenance at one of the few factories still operating in the area. People always want to talk about Flint like it's already dead. Like it was just a graveyard of the automotive industry waiting for the final nail in the coffin. But that's not the Flint I grew up in. Yeah, we had our struggles. By 2014, Flint's population had dropped from nearly 200,000 in the 1960s to under 100,000. The tax base had collapsed. Nearly 42% of our residents lived below the poverty line. That's more than double the national average. Over half the city was black. We were poor. We were predominantly minority. And as I'd learned, that made us expendable. But we were still a community. We still had block parties. We still had Friday night football games. We still had hope. That hope died with the water. April 25, 2014. I remember my mom came home from work and mentioned something about the water source changing. The city was switching from Lake Huron water, which we'd been getting through Detroit, to the Flint River. It was supposed to be temporary, just until a new pipeline was built. It was supposed to save the city money. She didn't think much of it. Neither did I. How could we know that this decision, made to save about $5 million, would end up costing billions and destroying countless lives? Here's what we didn't know. The Flint River was polluted. Decades of industrial waste had made it corrosive. And here's what the officials should have known what they did know. Actually, that corrosive water needed to be treated with anti-corrosion chemicals before running it through aging pipes. Those chemicals cost about $100 per day. $100 per day to prevent catastrophe. They didn't add them. Let that sink in. $100 a day. That's what our lives were worth to them. At first, we didn't notice anything dramatic. The water looked a little different maybe, but not alarmingly so. Then summer came. I'll never forget the first time I saw our water turn brown. It was a morning in late May. I was getting ready for school, turned on the bathroom sink, and this rust-colored liquid poured out. I stood there, staring at it, thinking maybe there was construction on our street or something. Mom, I called out. Something's wrong with the water. She came in, looked at it, and her face went tight. She'd been hearing things at the hospital. Other families complaining. Kids coming in with rashes. Don't drink it, she said. I'll get bottled water on the way home within weeks. It felt like everyone in Flint was buying bottled water. The local stores couldn't keep it stocked. People were driving to neighboring cities, loading up their cars with cases and cases of water bottles. But here's the thing about being poor. Bottled water is expensive. Really expensive when you're buying enough for a family of 4 to drink, cook with, brush teeth with. My parents were spending an extra $150 a month. Money we didn't have. And the city, they kept telling us the water was safe. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality issued statements. The water met federal standards, they said. It was perfectly safe, they said. People were just being paranoid, they said. Meanwhile, in our home and in thousands of other homes across Flint, the corrosive river water was eating away at the lead pipes. Lead was leaching into our water, into our bodies, into our brains. Lead is a neurotoxin. There is no safe level of exposure, especially for children. It causes irreversible brain damage, learning disabilities, behavioral problems, and developmental delays. And we were all bathing in it, cooking with it. Some people were still drinking it. By fall of 2014, I started noticing changes. Not in the water anymore. I was almost used to the weird color and smell, but in the people around me. My 7-year-old sister, Emma, who'd always been energetic and sharp as a tack, started having trouble in school. She'd forget things she'd just learned. Her teachers said she seemed distracted, unable to focus. My MOM took her to the doctor 3 times that semester. Maybe it's ADHD, one doctor suggested. Kids develop these things. But it wasn't just Emma. In my 8th grade class, at least 5 kids had developed rashes that wouldn't go away. 2 kids I knew had started losing their hair in patches. My best friend Marcus told me his little brother had been hospitalized with severe stomach pain and vomiting. My MOM, working at Hurley Medical Center, was seeing it every day. An unusual spike in skin problems, respiratory issues, kids with stomach problems, adults with headaches and memory issues. The emergency room was fuller than usual. And then the Legionnaire's disease outbreak hit. Between June 2014 and November 2015, at least 90 people in Flint contracted Legionnaire's disease. 12 people died. Legionnaire's is a severe pneumonia caused by bacteria that thrive in warm water systems like the ones in a city with compromised water infrastructure. The state knew about the outbreak by March 2015. They didn't tell us. They didn't warn the public until January 2016. People died, while the officials stayed silent. Let me say that again, because it's important. 12 people died, and the government didn't warn anyone. September 2015, a pediatrician at my mom's hospital, Dr. Mona Hannah Otisha, did something that would change everything. She decided to actually look at the data. She compared blood lead levels in Flint children before and after the water switch. What she found was damning. The percentage of children with elevated blood lead levels had doubled citywide. In some neighborhoods, it had tripled. She went public with her findings. Immediately, state officials attacked her credibility. They called her research unfortunate. They said she was causing near hysteria. They tried to discredit her publicly, but she didn't back down. Around the same time, a Virginia Tech professor named Mark Edwards came to Flint with his team. They tested the water in hundreds of homes. Some samples showed lead levels over 13,000 parts per billion. The EPA's action level is 15 parts per billion. Hazardous waste is classified at 5,000 parts per billion. Our water was more toxic than hazardous waste. The community had been sounding the alarm for over a year. Residents, like Lean Waters, had been testing their own water and finding catastrophic lead levels. People had been bringing bottles of brown, foul-smelling water to city council meetings, begging officials to listen. They were ignored, dismissed, patronized. Those people are just making noise, I overheard one official say at a community meeting my MOM dragged me to. They don't understand the science. We understood perfectly. We understood that our kids were getting sick. We understood that our hair was falling out. We understood that our water was poison. We just didn't have the power to make anyone listen. October 2015. The state finally admitted there was a problem. Governor Rick Snyder acknowledged that the water wasn't safe, but they still didn't switch us back to Lake Huron water. That wouldn't happen until October 16th. 2015, 18 months after the initial switch. 18 months of poison. But switching the water source back didn't magically fix everything. The damage to the pipes had been done. Lead was still leaching. We still couldn't drink the water. We still couldn't cook with it. We couldn't even take a proper shower. Let me describe what daily life looked like in my house. Every morning, I'd wake up and brush my teeth with bottled water. I'd heat bottled water in a pot on the stove to wash my face. We didn't trust the shower water on our skin anymore. My MOM would cook breakfast using bottled water. Even pasta. Even rice. Everything. Showers were quick and strategic. Get in, get wet, wash quickly, get out. Try not to get water in your mouth or eyes. My sister had to wear goggles in the shower. She was 7 years old, wearing swimming goggles to bathe in her own home. The city set up water distribution sites. Once a week, sometimes more, we'd drive to a church or school gym and wait in line for our case of bottled water. Sometimes the line was an hour long. Sometimes they ran out before we got there. I remember standing in one of those lines in the middle of winter, watching elderly people struggle to carry cases of water to their cars. Watching mothers with multiple small children try to load up enough water to last the week. Watching my neighbors, people who'd worked their entire lives, paid their water bills on time every month, reduced to standing in line for charity water. The humiliation of it was almost worse than the poison. And through all of this, through the poison, the sickness, the hair loss, the rashes, the brain damage, we still had to pay our water bills. Let me repeat that. We had to pay for the water that was poisoning us. Flint had some of the highest water rates in the country. Residents were paying an average of $140 per month for water they couldn't drink, couldn't cook with, couldn't safely bathe in. If you didn't pay, they'd shut off your service. If they shut off your service and you had kids, Child Protective Services could get involved. You could lose your children for not paying for poison water. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. As more information came out, the betrayal became clearer and clearer. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an unfortunate mistake. This was a choice. Multiple choices. Made by people who knew better. Here's what we learned. State-appointed emergency managers, who'd been put in charge of Flint because of financial troubles, made the decision to switch to the Flint River. Not elected officials. Not people accountable to us. Appointed managers. Brought in to cut costs, no matter what. Officials at the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality knew the water needed corrosion control. They told the Flint Water Treatment Plant they didn't need it. This was a lie. Federal law required it. The EPA knew there were problems by February 2015. They didn't take meaningful action for nearly a year. Multiple state officials knew about the Legionnaire's disease outbreak and didn't tell the public. Governor Snyder's own office received warnings about the water quality as early as February 2015. Nothing changed. When residents complained, they were dismissed. When scientists raised alarms, they were attacked. When doctors presented evidence, they were called unfortunate and accused of fear-mongering. The emails that came out later were even more damning. State officials joking about the water quality. One official suggesting that residents complaining about the water only want free water. Another saying that Flint residents are getting blown out of proportion with their concerns. While my 7-year-old sister wore goggles in the shower, government officials were making jokes. While children's brains were being irreversibly damaged, officials were worried about appearances and costs. While my community was being poisoned, the people in power were covering their asses. By early 2016, the national media had finally picked up the story. Flint was everywhere. Celebrities were sending bottled water. The president visited. Everyone suddenly cared. But the damage was done. Studies would later show that thousands of Flint children had been exposed to dangerous levels of lead. Even exposure to just a few micrograms per deciliter can cause permanent brain damage in children. Low IQ, behavioral problems, learning disabilities, ADHD, increased aggression, higher risk of incarceration later in life. My sister Emma, she was diagnosed with a learning disability at age 9. She struggles with focus and memory. Is that from the lead? We'll never know for sure. But the timing is suspicious, isn't it? Teachers across Flint reported seeing changes in their students. Kids who'd been doing fine suddenly falling behind. Increased behavioral problems. More kids needing special education services. An entire generation of children robbed of their full potential. The economic impact is staggering too. Researchers estimate that lead exposure from the Flint Water Crisis will result in a total loss of somewhere between 1.4 and 3.1 million IQ points. Among the children exposed, each lost IQ point translates to a reduction in lifetime earnings. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in lost economic productivity. But forget the economics for a second. These are kids. Kids who deserved better. Kids who deserved clean water and a fair shot at life. My family left Flint in 2017. My dad got a job offer in another state, and my parents jumped at the chance to get us out. Lots of families did the same. Anyone who could afford to leave left. The people who couldn't afford to leave, they're still there, still dealing with the aftermath, still drinking bottled water in many cases, because the trust is gone. Even after the pipes were supposedly fixed, even after officials declared the water safe again, many residents still won't drink it. Would you? People wanted accountability. They wanted someone to pay for what happened. They wanted justice. In 2016, criminal charges were filed against several officials. Some got off with barely a slap on the wrist. Others had their charges eventually dropped. Former Governor Rick Snyder was eventually charged with 2 counts of willful neglect of duty into 0-1 almost 7 years after the crisis began. As of 2024, he pleaded no contest to misdemeanors and received no jail time. No jail time for poisoning a city. Other officials faced various charges. Some were convicted. Most got away with it. In 2021, a $626 million settlement was reached in the civil lawsuit against the state. Sounds like a lot, right? Divided among the roughly 30,000 claimants, most people received somewhere between $2,000 and $25,000. Some received more, depending on their level of exposure and documented harm. My family got about $8,000 total, split for ways. $2,000 per person. That's what our poisoning was worth. How do you put a price on a stolen childhood? On permanent brain damage, on the loss of trust in your government, on the trauma that makes you hesitate before getting a glass of water? You can't, but apparently the going rate is about $2,000. Here's what keeps me up at night. Flint isn't unique. It's just the city where everyone was watching. An estimated 9.2 million lead service lines still exist in America. That means millions of homes could potentially have lead in their water. Cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Newark have all had lead in their drinking water. Some still do. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave the nation's drinking water infrastructure a C grade. Billions of dollars are needed to upgrade our water systems. But infrastructure is expensive. It's not sexy. It doesn't win elections. So the pipes keep aging. The risk keeps growing. And the next Flint is waiting to happen. And here's the pattern that's impossible to ignore. This happens to poor communities. It happens to black and brown communities. It happens to people without political power. Would this have happened in a wealthy, white suburb? Would officials have let it go on for 18 months if the residents had money and connections? Would they have told people in a rich community that their concerns were unfortunate? We all know the answer. This is environmental racism. This is what happens when the people making decisions don't have to live with the consequences. When the people suffering don't have the power to fight back. When a community is deemed expendable. I'm 22 now. I've been out of Flint for 7 years. I've built a life somewhere else. I'm doing okay. But the Flint Water Crisis lives in my body. It lives in my brain. It lives in the hesitation before I drink tap water. It lives in the anxiety I feel about trusting institutions and authority figures. It lives in the anger that rises up when I see other communities being ignored and dismissed. My sister is 17. She's in special education classes. She works twice as hard as other kids to keep up. She'll carry the effects of lead exposure for the rest of her life. So will thousands of other Flint children. The economic devastation continues. Flint's population has continued to decline. Property values plummeted. Businesses closed. The tax base shrunk even further. The crisis that was supposed to save money ended up costing billions and pushing the city further into distress. Flint is still recovering. Some progress has been made. Most of the lead service lines have been replaced, though it took until 2022 to finish. 8 years after the crisis began, community organizations continue to provide support. Healthcare systems are tracking the affected children and trying to provide interventions. But you can't undo lead exposure. You can't give those kids back their full potential. You can't erase the trauma. You can't restore the trust. The wound has scarred. Over. But it hasn't healed. I'm telling you this story not just because it's my story, but because it needs to be heard. Because it could happen again. Because it is happening in other places. Just more slowly, more quietly, where the cameras aren't rolling. The Flint Water Crisis wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an unavoidable tragedy. It was a choice. A series of choices made by people who valued money over lives, who valued appearances over truth, who valued convenience over justice. And those same systems, those same priorities, those same power structures that poisoned Flint are still in place across America. Infrastructure is still crumbling. Poor communities are still being neglected. The people in power are still making decisions that prioritize short-term savings over long-term human welfare. Water is life. That's not just a slogan. It's a fundamental truth. Access to clean water is a human right. But in America, in the richest country in the world, nearly 100,000 people were poisoned by their own water supply, while officials told them everything was fine. That should terrify you. It should enrage you. It should make you ask, if this could happen to Flint, could it happen to my community? The answer is yes. Unless we change things. Unless we demand accountability. Unless we decide that every community, regardless of income, regardless of race, deserves clean water and a government that protects them instead of poisoning them. I still can't drink tap water without that moment of hesitation. That pause. That split second of doubt. That's my burden to carry. That's the ghost of Flint that lives in me. But I refused to let it be silent. I refused to let what happened to my community be forgotten or dismissed as just another sad story from a struggling Rust Belt city. We were poisoned. We were betrayed. We were told we didn't matter. But we do matter. Every person who suffered matters. Every child whose potential was stolen matters. Every family forced to choose between paying for poison water or losing their home matters. Flint matters. And if Flint doesn't matter, then none of us do.